Hello and welcome. My name is Amanda Popila, and I'm a researcher in human capital here at the Conference Board. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's Human Capital Watch on a brand new piece of research from the Conference Board determining the business impact of employee engagement. So I'm joined by a couple of guests today, and I'll introduce them in just a moment, but I do want to start with a few housekeeping items. First of all, we'd encourage you to engage in the conversation with us and with the guests today. So please type your questions into the chat box, and I'll be monitoring the box throughout the webcast, and we'll ask the questions as they come up. If you would like to download the presentation, that button is also at the bottom of your screen. You'll also be able to make the screen larger by clicking those arrows at the top of your screen. You can also view this webcast on demand, and it'll be available on our webcast about 24 hours after today's show. So please look for it there if there's anything you missed or if you want to share it with colleagues. And finally, we ask that you complete the evaluation that will pop up on your screen at the end of the broadcast today. So it just takes a couple minutes and it helps us with our future programming. So please do take a moment to complete that evaluation. You are able to earn HRCI, SHRM, and Cpe Recertification Credits if you're attending live. I see some have already done this. If you need credits, please type your name, your email address, and the type of credit you need in that box on the left side of your screen that says Request Credits here. If you're looking for Cpe, you will need to check the boxes. I think there's 3 check boxes that will show up on your screen, so please make sure to do that as well. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters today. First, I'm joined today by Annette Engelsgaard. Annette is the Senior Executive at Teleperformance, experienced in employee engagement, and heads a corporate department supporting HR executives and management across over 60 subsidiaries. So Annette, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Amanda.
And I'm also joined by Greg Aiken, who is the Head of People Strategy and Insights for the Royal Bank of Scotland. He leads the development of the group's people strategy globally and works across HR and the business to drive employee engagement, leadership, and talent effectiveness. So Greg, thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Great. So before we hear from our guests, they're each going to go into how they determine the business impact of their engagement program, some of the measurements that they use, and how they use those measurements. But they were profiled in a piece of research that we just produced. It's brand new. It came out just a couple of weeks ago. Called Determining the Business Impact of Employee Engagement. And at the Conference Board, we have a long history of employee engagement research. You can see here our definitions of employee engagement, a culture of engagement. Our research goes back to 2006 with our definition. And in 2014, we started what we call the Engagement Institute. And we've been developing research each year since. We started with a culture of engagement and what organizations can do, the 8 elements of an engaging culture. In 2015, we moved on to the role of leaders in developing a culture of engagement. 2016, we talked about the role of employees in owning their own engagement. And then just this year, we produced a piece of research on the employee value proposition and how organizations should look at employees throughout the entire employee life cycle and the employee experience throughout that life cycle. So these are some of the previous research reports that we've written. The Conference Board actually partnered with Deloitte and Mercer Sirota on this research. So we involve researchers from all 3 organizations, and we also involve practitioners in the work. So Greg and Annette are both part of the Engagement Institute, and we have many other members in the US, in Europe, and in Asia. So this report on the business impact, this really came as part of the Engagement Institute, and in talking to our practitioners about how are they measuring the success of their programs. We're spending a lot of money on employee engagement, and we think we're doing good work, but how do we make improvements based on some of the feedback that we're getting? So we published this report. We have some examples of how companies are doing that. What are some of the measurements that companies are using? And we profiled 3 organizations. So we profiled General Motors and the Royal Bank of Scotland and Teleperformance, and we'll hear a little bit more about their stories today. We also include 8 questions that you can ask about your own engagement initiatives and how you can and how you can improve your engagement programs going forward. So these were our research questions. We're looking at how organizations are measuring the impact of their initiatives. We also looked at determining a return on investment and actually calculating an ROI of engagement initiatives, and we have an example of that in the report as well. And then we also look at best practices, and we have the in-depth case studies of organizations that are measuring the impact of their initiatives. Here are some of the measures that we look at in the report. So many organizations are looking at the impact of their programs on turnover and retention, on customer satisfaction. I think Annette will talk a little bit about that in her presentation. We also look at productivity, profitability, and safety. And in the report, General Motors has an example of how they measured the rise in engagement with fewer safety incidents and how there's a correlation there. So there are a few examples that we share. But today we really want to focus on the two case studies and the two leaders that are with us today. So I'm going to hand it over to Annette to talk a little bit more about what Teleperformance is doing in engagement and how they're measuring some of the results there. So Annette.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you for inviting me for this opportunity to share with everyone what we do in Teleperformance. Before I start, I just want to make sure you can hear me.
We can hear you. You sound good.
And maybe see me as well. Okay, so my name is Annette. I'm Danish. I live in France, where the headquarters of Teleperformance is based, and this week I'm actually in Tunisia, assessing why Tunisia is a great place to work. So this comes very timely. I joined Teleperformance 20 years ago, and I'm heading up a department that is called Employee Experience and Engagement. Our main role is, in fact, going beyond those critical, very, very critical HR processes and looking at beyond those processes, what is it that makes employees engaged? We are focusing on employee well-being. So before going into the measurement, just a very short introduction to Teleperformance. So we are a global leader in the contact center industry. We were founded in 1978 with 10 workstations in Paris. Today, after 40 years of organic growth and acquisition, we have 300,000 employees across almost 80 countries. So we have grown significantly. What is interesting about Teleperformance and this business in general is that there have been so many changes in the business. The clients, the markets, the services, the products, the technology. But one thing that hasn't really changed is our culture. And what you can see here is really what makes Teleperformance. On the left side, you will see our mission statement. We say that we deliver an outstanding customer experience at every single opportunity, and there is some more, and I will skip that and just focus on that very first part of our mission statement, which is we deliver an outstanding customer experience. From our department, we translate that into, first of all, asking ourselves, who is our first and most important customer? And for us, it's the employees. So when we look at our mission statement, we say at Teleperformance we deliver an outstanding employee experience. What does that mean for Teleperformance across the world? It basically means that no matter who you are in Teleperformance, if you are in recruitment, if you are in training, if you are in finance, if you are in IT, if you are in operations, payroll, etc., you need to think about, how do I make sure that I create an outstanding employee experience at that specific moment of truth? And basically we look at ourselves as everyone plays with different instruments, but everyone knows what everyone is playing, so that when we play together, it becomes a symphony. So we're like, in terms of the employee experience, we are like the chain. We are not stronger than the weakest link. So if one does not play the right tune, we fail. So we look at the employee life cycle and constantly seek to address how do we create an outstanding employee experience. We know, and I will show you that later, but we know that happy people make happy customers, happy end users, and happy end users will make happy clients. And at the end of the day, if we have happy clients, we will also have a happy P&L. So it starts with our mission statement, and then that mission statement is supported by what you can see to the right, which is our values that defines who we are. Now, you probably can't see it, but I can tell you the first one is the integrity, which is basically I say what I do and I do what I say. I lead by example. No matter who I am, if I'm a leader, if I see paper on the floor, I will pick it up, and I will expect everyone to do the same. I lead by example, so I show the way I do things before I ask other people to do. That's the first thing. That's the whole foundation of our culture. Then we have the respect, and respect is, of course, for the nature, for the communities, for the planet, but it is also respect for the employees and for our colleagues, for our customers and our clients. Professionalism is a third value, which basically defines that we have processes and standards, and we all need to have the discipline to follow these processes and standards. We constantly look in improving them, and that is the fourth value, which is innovation. What is interesting about innovation for us is that it does not necessarily have to be scientifically a scientific approach to innovation, but really much more simple, looking into doing things in a different way to make it smarter, faster, less costly, more efficient. And when it comes to innovation, the first thing we do is ask our employees, what do you think we need to improve? So innovation for us is critical in terms of developing both our customer satisfaction, our client satisfaction, and our employee satisfaction. And the last thing is the commitment, the passion for doing what we're doing. And this is very interesting because being an agent is probably one of the toughest jobs in the world. In the outsourcing business, we serve customers, and a full-time agent probably speaks with around 5,000, 6,000 customers in a year. And those customers are in contact with us because they have an issue. We need to help them. So sitting down for a full day and for a full year speaking with maybe 6,000 different customers, it's a very, very tough job. And we know that it is not the CV that will determine if you will be a great agent and will perform and provide an outstanding customer experience. It is much more who you are and how well you fit into our organization. So the passion, the fire, the commitment is something that we look at from the initial phase of recruitment. So our mission statement and our values, those together will determine how we behave, and that is what we call our DNA, so our culture. And this is something that has not changed throughout those 40 years. So very shortly about Teleperformance. Now, looking at our department, employee engagement, I want to share with you some of the main things that we work on in our department. And I hope you can still hear me loud and clear. So what we do, I'm going to...
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to show you a slide with the main programs and activities we do in my department. And just for you to know how do we work, because we are a huge group with 300,000 people across the world in 80 countries. In each country, for each of the programs that we have what we call a subject matter expert that we work with to implement the things that you're going to see on the following screen, okay? So it's not that we travel around the world and implement it ourselves. We give the local companies the ownership to implement and develop the programs that I'm going to show you. So here you can see our department as per today. And I want to start with the first part, which is health and safety. So we are responsible for health and safety in our company across the world, going beyond legislation. So what this means is basically that we, together with our local SMEs, subject matter experts, implement a healthy and safe work culture, okay? And it is part of the first rule of people management that we have in the group, which is creating a great workplace and a great work environment. And this goes together also with the next point, which is the premises standard. We have a standard that outlines kind of with guiding principles how you should create a contact center, from recruitment areas to training areas to operations to well-being areas such as fitness, cafeteria, break rooms, game rooms, library, etc., and sharing areas. And across all these areas in our sites, we also define what are the rules in terms of acoustics, in terms of lighting, safety, of course, security, hands-on management, so proximity, and also general well-being. So these two go hand in hand and are extremely important because it's like the Maslow's pyramid. It's the basic that needs to be there, including also the right equipment and tools to do a great job. Then we are responsible for our onboarding. So we develop an onboarding package. Reason why we did this is because one of our main challenges is the attrition, because this is a really, really tough job. Our highest attrition takes place the first 90 days within the life cycle of an employee, of a new hire. So we decided that in order to decrease this attrition, the highest attrition within the first 90 days, we needed to develop a strong onboarding of the new hires. So we created the onboarding package that really describes who is doing what at which moment of time, from before hiring, to the first day, to the training, to the nesting or on-the-job training, to integration into the operations, and measuring then the satisfaction throughout that period. Then we have the total reward framework, which is another challenge we have in the business, and I think we all have this challenge. We know that salary is a hygiene factor. People work for money, but it is not the money that will make people stay. We also know that as it is a hygiene factor, if we increase the salary, it is not necessarily increasing the satisfaction. We know we have to have a minimum level, and it should be at the same level as competition, if not better, for sure. But increasing it is not a given for impacting positively the satisfaction of our people. So what we have developed is what we call the total reward framework, which is a way of communicating not only the monetary compensation pack, but also all the other things around. And I have a slide later on that shows you what it is that we do. But it is all from a great workplace environment to growth, personal and professionally growing in the company, to well-being, work-life balance, etc., etc. And then another thing we have is the, I can't see my slide here, but let me see if I can just zoom out and see what it is. Yeah, the Global Recognition Program, sorry. So the Global Recognition Program is something we have just launched. Dale Carnegie says that people, they stay in a company and they are willing to give a little bit extra, but only if we are able to recognize our people. And it's true, when we look at the definition of engagement is not only satisfaction, it is much more. It is going one step further and making sure that our employees strive and give a little bit extra to the benefit of the company without asking anything in return. So we have launched this global recognition program where we want to recognize high performers, but we also want to recognize the right behavior. So looking at our values and our DNA and recognizing people that go beyond, above and beyond our values. Another thing we do in our department is corporate social responsibility. We are responsible for implementing our corporate social responsibility policies. And this goes from anti-corruption to code of ethics to human rights to equal opportunities and other policies as well, data privacy and GDPR. What is interesting about corporate social responsibility, and we find, is that when we look at the companies across the world in our group, we see a high correlation between companies that have a high activity in corporate social responsibility, both out in the communities with the nature, but also inside the companies in terms of diversity and inclusion. High level of activity, they also have a much higher level of engagement. And this is something that is very, very important for us. So corporate social responsibility is becoming one of the key drivers in our company. It's good for employees, it's the right thing to do, but it's also good for business. And then the two last parts of our department responsibility is the KSAT, we call it, and the ESAT. The KSAT is we are responsible for measuring the client satisfaction, so not the customers, not the end users that we interact with, but our clients. So we are responsible for measuring their satisfaction with our services, from recruitment to retention to growth to account management, IT, technology, of course the results, the KPIs and operations, and also innovation. And last but not least, we are responsible for the satisfaction survey of our employees. So we do measure the satisfaction of our employees during recruitment and also after training, etc. But we also have an annual survey where we call it the in-life cycle survey, where we measure the satisfaction and the engagement of our employees across all these different drivers that you can see here on the screen. So these are the main activities that we have in our department. Now, the next slide is just a repeat of what I have said with some activities. I'm sharing with you actually the business plan for 2019, or some of the slides. So if we go to the first slide here, which is about our health and safety standard and us trying to drive, going beyond legislation and driving health and safety as a culture in our companies, you can see that we are auditing and asking our companies to implement specific things such as risk assessment, evacuation drills, and other parts of a health and safety culture. And what you can also see is that we are launching specific best practice sharing pandemic plan. By end of the year, we're going to share with everyone how to make efficient evacuation drills. In some countries, it's part of the legislation to do evacuation drills, but in some countries, it certainly is not. So this is something that we push through in our group. And then we also just recently, actually a couple of days ago, before the weekend, launched a group health and safety video. And apart from the fact that we shared it with our health and safety subject matter experts, you are actually the first ones to see this. So I think we're going to just share a minute of that video, and then I will be back on. So if we go to if you are going to launch the video.
Ergonomics. Maintain a good posture. When sitting in front of your computer, your feet should be flat on the floor or on a footrest. Your knees are level with your hips and your forearms and thighs are parallel to the floor. If necessary, adjust your seat up or down. Make sure that the top of the monitor is at your horizontal eye level, so your head and neck remain straight. Keeping your back straight will also help amplify your voice and reduce the risk of straining your throat.
Stretch your arms, neck and hands every now and then. Reach for the ceiling. Clasp your hands together and turn them inside out. Reach to the ceiling. Hold for 10 seconds, pull hands backwards or sideways and hold for a further 10 seconds each movement. Shoulder rolls. Rotate your shoulders backwards approximately 20 times. Ease.
Okay, I can't see the video, so I just want to am I back on air?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. So moving to the next slide, sharing again with you our business plan for 2019, our premises standard that I mentioned before. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to consult with experts, architects and acoustic experts, lighting experts, ergonomic experts, to make sure that we are up to date with our standard and make sure that we include any high-tech trends that are happening out there to make sure that we attract but also retain our employees. We are focusing also on educating our people. It's not just about us creating a safe workplace, but also for our employees to make healthy decisions. Again, we are in a very stressful environment. We sit down for many hours and we speak with or interact with customers that need help, and it's not always easy. So we try to teach our people how to live a healthy lifestyle, including health, nutrition, fitness, and also work-life balance, to which we, of course, play a very important role. And this is something we constantly improve in practices and providing videos of, you saw one of them now, but videos on how to behave safely and healthy in our work environment, but also outside the work. Oh, so here was the video, but we jumped that, we did that already. Another thing that we are doing in our group is making sure that people can raise their voices. It's part of innovation, but it's certainly also part of employee care and corporate social responsibility. So what we have created is a channel for any stakeholder to raise their voice. We call it HR inquiries, and you can see here the results from January up to end of October is we have received more than 40,000 inquiries across many different items. It could be recruitment, which is the main reason why people reach out to us, either because they want to apply, but it can also be that they cannot join the interview, etc., etc. To general services and requests for support, to job certifications and tax statements, payroll, scheduling, health and safety training, and also complaints. We're glad to see that the complaint is not that high, but again, it is critical that we have a place for anyone to raise their voice, and we are here, and we measure, we track all the cases, we measure the service level, against objectives, and you can see here that currently our service level is at 80%. So we handle or solve all the cases 80% of the time on time. Our objective for next year is to reach 90% SLA. And then this slide here, it might probably look a little bit confusing, but in the preparation of our 2019 business plan, what we did, we wanted to map out, with putting wellness in the heart of our business, what does it mean to be happy in TP? What does it mean to feel well in Teleperformance? So we started putting wellness at the center, and then we said, okay, it is important that we hire the right person. So we have predictive modeling, or we have a predictive modeling that tells us how well this person fits into our organization. We look at the onboarding, the integration. We look at the growth in our company, the personal growth and the professional growth. We look at health and safety. We look at recognition. It is important that we have emotional intelligence throughout all our sites across the world. And we look at diversity and inclusion, which is part of corporate social responsibility, and also having fun in the workplace and feeling that you go to work with a higher purpose, whether it's professional or personal, but that Teleperformance is part of that. And when we mapped out all these things, we then also started to map out, like a fishbone, what impacts then these main areas. And then we started looking at the relationship between these areas. And what we found, and this might be different for you, but what we found very interesting was that everything where it came from wellness actually at the end of the day entered back into higher purpose and fun. So for us in 2019, we're going to focus not only on improving what we're already doing, but also looking at how can we create in everything we do a higher purpose, and at the same time also having fun. So this is one of the key objectives for us next year in 2019. And having said this, what is important now is that when we look at employee engagement and business impact, it's not enough to do just one thing. We need to do all of it, because again, everything fits together, as you can see here in our simplified mapping. So what we do, apart from making sure that we do all these things, is that we measure the impact in terms of output. So first of all, we ask our companies to provide us evidence of what they do. We audit the evidence either on-site, like I'm here in Tunisia this week, so we can audit it on-site, but we can also audit it and monitor it virtually or remotely. And we make sure that we understand the evidence, that it is clear, and we ask for proof of communication. And then we speak with people, we speak with our employees, and we try to understand, do they see it? Because one thing is that we do things, but another thing is, do employees really perceive it? So what we do in our department is also auditing the gap between reality and perception, and feeding back to the organization, well, employees' perception will become your reality. So you need to act on their perception, not necessarily your reality. Then we measure the satisfaction. And last but not least, we measure the business impact. And it could be directly in operations in terms of KPIs, average handling time, first call resolution, and things like that. But it goes beyond that, and the real final outcome, which is either the client satisfaction or specific KPIs that are linked to a specific program. So, for instance, engagement versus corporate social responsibility, or the 90 days attrition versus our onboarding package, etc. So on this last slide, I just show 3 of the outcomes that we measure. So the onboarding program, from before we had it to we have it now today, we have decreased our 90 days attrition with 14%. And in terms of our employees' satisfaction with the compensation package, since the implementation of the total reward framework, the satisfaction has increased with 13%. And then the last thing, and this is where we are lucky in our department, because we measure both the employee satisfaction and also the client satisfaction. And you can see here that we have a direct correlation. It's not perfect, it's not 1, but we have a direct correlation between employee satisfaction and client satisfaction. And by the way, the employee satisfaction, the 2018 is not plotted in, but there is a 4% increase since 2017. So they go hand in hand, and it truly shows that when we say happy people make happy customers, make happy client, it is a fact. But it is not enough to make one thing. We need to make it all. We need to do all these things to make sure that our employees are not only satisfied, not only stay, but they also strive, and they give a little bit extra to the benefit of the business. And I think that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Annette, for sharing those measurements. Also the video, it looks great. I'm glad we could be the first audience to see it. So for those of you who are dialed in, please ask your questions in the chat pad. We will save a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, but I want to make sure that Greg has enough time to go over his slides as well. So Greg, let's move on to you.
Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. It's a pleasure to walk you through some of the approach that Royal Bank of Scotland has done on attracting, engaging and retaining great people, and importantly, how do we measure the effectiveness to put our leaders in a position to make informed people decisions. If I, by way of reference to the slides, maybe just talk a little bit on the world is changing. So what you have before you are a number of influences into the political, social, technological and environmental impact that we see in the world. This is part of our strategist lens, and we look outside the bank and look at the influences that we see to ensure that we test our strategy against that and ensure we have the right measures in place. A couple to call out. I'm in Europe, in the UK, so Brexit is a particularly important one as we go forward over the next 12 months. But also the lack of digital and analytical skills around the place. It's a very, very challenging place to attract, engage, retain, reward great people who have a very strong bent in digital lenses. The digitisation of the workplace, particularly in the industry I'm in, which is banking, is particularly prevalent, and making sure that we have the right talent for today as well as building the talent for tomorrow is one of the real reasons why my role as the Group Head of People Strategy and Insight exists. It's to work across the organisation, work across departments, and pull together insight that allows us to understand the progress in our culture as well as the key people indicators that we use to help business leaders across the organisation make informed people decisions. Couple of things to talk to you about in this respect. One is the changing face of global industry, but in banking particularly, we've seen over the last 5-6 years quite a significant change in the way that international payments, for example, are made, and that has saved the public, particular organisations, £60 billion over the last 5 years, driven principally by new entrants to the marketplace. And you can see that in the left-hand side narrative of that slide. On the right-hand slide, there are a number of new entrants to the financial services sector called fintechs who leverage technology to provide some much faster banking products than perhaps the old-fashioned banks as they would be referred to by the fintechs. And we can see on the circles under the word today that in many cases the take-up of the fintech products is very little just now. Only around the credit card systems do we see any take-up at all. But in 5 years' time, we expect that to be significantly up in things like current accounts, foreign transactions. In the right-hand side, just look at the near ubiquitous approach to engaging with fintechs for your aggregation of your banking accounts, as well as a number of products and services. So the banking world is changing quite markedly over the next 5, 10, 15 years, and it's something that organisations see in their own industry, but certainly in mine, it is a significant lever to ensure that as I shape our employee engagement strategy, our culture approach to the organisation, as well as tracking the progress against our key critical people measures, that we really understand what measures that matter in relation to attracting great people into our organisation. Coupled with this, of course, is the changing world of human resources. The needs of a human resources professional are particularly changing. The centricity away from systems that provide reports to much more web-based, now related information. So making sure that there is information at your fingertips, particularly in relation to real-time interactive dashboards, means that the HR function, the qualities that are associated with an HR professional are changing over the last 5 years, and certainly over the next 5 to 10 years. And indeed, one estimate by the World Economic Forum is that 65% of children entering primary school today will ultimately end up working in completely new job types that aren't on our radar yet. That statement seems far-fetched until you look on the left-hand side of this slide here, and all 8 of these jobs have been introduced in the last 10 years, whether it be app developer, sustainability manager, millennial generational expert, or indeed that one at number 7, the vloggers and YouTube content creators, which have really taken hold over the last 4 or 5 years. And in fact, Pewdiepie, who is a vlogger who's based here in the UK, has the world's largest following of 70 million followers as at the 10th of November, with a reach of 19 billion views to date. And he's recently been named in the Times 100 World's Most Influential People. So when you look at some of the emerging roles, you see that it's not unrealistic to assume that the people strategy, the next 10 years of our own organisations, for colleagues on on this call and other calls would really have to be more engaged in the future shape of the organisation moving forward. And indeed, if you look at back at 2006, organisations such as Facebook and Twitter were really in their infancy. So you fast forward to today, you can see just how influential those organisations have been in the workplace of today, and certainly in shaping the focus and the measures that we take forward. I highlight some of them here, but we have a very strong employee engagement and employee listening approach to our member banks in the Royal Bank of Scotland group, including a dedicated leadership measure that helps us assess the effectiveness and impact of our leaders at 3 different layers of the organisation. The top one is enterprise, the second is franchise, and the third one is line management effectiveness. Joining them together helps us provide a real assessment of how effective our leaders are in developing the right people in the workplace and leading the organisation through constant change. We also have an engagement index that helps us understand the extent to which our people are engaged in the organisation and the extent to which they provide discretionary effort. And culture in our organisation is particularly important, and I've worked with the UK regulator and the US regulator to establish a culture measure within our organisation that measures the extent to which we are progressing to our cultural goals within RBS. All 3 of these measures are in the bottom line of the assessments that we have on our leadership performance. So these have an impact on your balanced scorecard if you're a senior leader in Royal Bank of Scotland. One bit of advice I would give to anyone on the call is making sure that you don't measure everything that moves, but you measure what matters. And represented on that slide are a number of measures that we use across Royal Bank of Scotland Group, principally because they have a very strong causation and correlation between the effectiveness of our people and the ultimate impact of business performance, sales, service, and financial performance. I'll come to that in a slide in a couple of minutes, if I may. All of these measures are measured every 6 months and are provided direct to the desktops of all of our business leaders across the group. So these measures are ones that we shape as part of what we call our employee listening strategy. And on this slide, you can see the employee listening strategy in a summary slide. It's an always-on approach, so we are lucky enough to be the world's largest user of Facebook at Workplace. We have over 75,000 live users across the world in Facebook at Work, which allows us to really get communication, engagement messages and feedback right to the desktops of all of our people 24 hours a day. We also have a global employee engagement survey that measures a number of core people measures twice a year. It's called Our View, and we launch it in March and September of each year. The timing for those 2 surveys is aligned with our operating rhythm as an organisation. So the measures that come out of that survey then feed into our half-year and full-year performance reviews across the organisation. I also run what's called a Working Together survey, which is an internal customer service effectiveness survey. We ask every single member of staff in the organisation to create a Net Promoter Score and comment on the effectiveness of each of the functions and services such as technology in their provision of service to the front line to ensure that their provision of service is effective at putting them in a position to serve customers well. And each of the heads of the functions like HR and finance and risk, as well as technology and the call centres, every one of those business heads receives a Net Promoter Score from the front line against every single attribute of our core service behaviours. And that is a way we internalise customer service within our organisation. And I run that survey twice a year and provide that feedback direct to our board. And again, this stuff feeds back into the performance cycle of our organisation. So you can see where there's an always-on part of it here. We also run 360 as an on-demand service, so over 5,000 senior leaders in the organisation participate each year in our 360, and again that feeds back into the performance cycle to ensure that we have bottom line impact on the people measures and the approach that we have across the organisation. We work very closely with partners such as IBM Watson and Facebook at Work, as well as the artificial intelligence team of Microsoft. We pull qualitative insight from across the organisation anonymously that allows us to apply artificial intelligence to understand employee sentiment 24 hours a day. We're in the foothills of that. There's more work to be done. But this week, for example, I'm meeting our colleagues in IBM Watson to receive some of the insight from our most recent survey, where we had over 50,000 free text comments on what it would take to make your business unit a great place to work. And we're then analysing that using the IBM Watson artificial intelligence engine to assess the different sentiments across our organisation. We also work with our colleagues in Facebook to look at the anonymised free text comments in workplace Facebook at Work. And I'm working with our colleagues in Microsoft similarly for the 365 application. So hopefully you can see where we're leveraging quite a lot of information across the organisation to help our people leaders really understand what attracts, engages, motivates these colleagues to stay in the workplace. A couple of examples on the so what part of it. In our call centres, I've analysed the work we do in call centres by looking at the key people metrics that provide positive links to business performance. These measures include engagement, but when we map those 7 core metrics to the people areas of our contact centres, we see that the areas that are strong in the people measures have a differentiatedly consistent improvement in handling time, talk time, customer wrap time, as well as customer hold time. And the calls per hour in the business areas with the strong people measures have improved by 40% in those contact centres. So a really strong link between the strong people measures, particularly in engagement, leadership, operating rhythm and business performance, and how that impacts the core outcome measures of the call centres that serve our customers in banking. Similarly, when we look at our tens of thousands of business units who serve customers in our branch banking network, we've prioritised them or ranked them based on customer service, as you can see here. And if you freeze them in that rank order, what we can see is that the areas with the strongest top 10% of customer service have the strongest levels of employee engagement, and the bottom 10% have the weakest levels of customer service and employee engagement. Overlaying that with the leadership index, the strongest leaders are engaging with the strongest engagement scores and driving customer service at the highest level. Interestingly, that tripartite relationship between customer service, strong engagement, and high levels of employee leadership are generating near zero levels of employee turnover and attrition, whereas the bottom 10% in terms of engagement, leadership and customer service are delivering turnover levels of 15%. 15% of employee turnover in organisations of the size, scale and complexity of Royal Bank of Scotland, Teleperformance or General Motors is huge in financial terms, but nothing like as impactful as the impact it has on sales over target. And we can see here the top 10% in customer service are generating stronger engagement, leadership, near zero employee turnover, and 24% enhanced sales over target. So 24% improvements in sales in those areas that have the highest levels of engagement and leadership. This is a longitudinal study over the last 7 years, generating broadly the same level of variation you see before you. So I guess what I'm saying in RBS, as we look across our business focused areas, our business facing areas, as well as our contact centres, is that the service profit chain, the measures that drive superior, sustainable, differentiated performance in our people are also driving strong levels of customer service, financial performance, and customer net promoter scores as well. So I guess one of my bits of advice to any colleagues on this call is making sure that you measure the right measures for your organisation. These are ones that are appropriate and important to me in RBS in a bank in Europe. It may well be the case that it's not the same for your organisation. But once you find those measures, linking them to sales, service and financial performance will really give you a differentiated business performance review, as you can see here as well. So I guess that's my presentation. One final point is please don't measure everything that moves. Measure what matters in your business. So get to the measures that are important, that drive your business, and make sure that you are able to measure them on a regular basis. With that, I'll maybe pause and hand back to the studio in New York.
First of all, thank you both. I know we've been talking for a few months now and for this report, and it's always interesting to see how things have changed and how you're progressing. So really appreciate this overview. And Greg, I know, I love that comment, don't measure everything that moves, measure what matters. And we can see a little bit how you came up with those measures. And I think in the report we talk as well about some of the measures that tend to be important for some of the companies that we spoke with. And I think it's great advice to kind of find what those things are for your organization and to measure those. So those are some great examples. We do have a couple minutes for questions. And the first one is for Annette, but I think both of you could probably answer all of these questions. So Annette, have you found any relationship between the immediate manager's engagement and the engagement of their team? Have you looked at that?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. There is a direct correlation between the direct manager, first line manager, and the teams and their engagement. And it's a great question, and it's something that is also on our radar for 2019, is to make sure that our first line managers are not managers but leaders. So when we talk about the operations, typically we find people, supervisors, that are what we call KPI controllers. And they are important, but they are not necessarily leaders and not leading people in the right direction with a higher purpose. So we are going to develop a leadership program for our supervisors. We train our supervisors in leadership, of course, but we want to make it more pragmatic and basically use a motto that I think you all know, which is, if you see it, you own it, which is a simple way of making sure that you don't pass on anything to anyone else. You take the ownership of everything around you, and in particular in your team. So yes, the supervisor role is critical, and to have a leader and not a controller or a manager.
Great, thank you. And Greg, you touched on this a little bit in your slides as well. Do you have anything to add?
Yes. Yeah, so our studies quite, across the organisation, it's very clear that people join the bank, but they leave their line manager. The importance of a great line manager is incredibly focused around the culture that individual creates, the engagement that individual develops, and that relationship that you have with the line manager. We have 5 lead indicators in RBS that are driving the vast majority of our differentiated performance and our good leaders. That's engagement, leadership, line management effectiveness, culture, and operating rhythm, with line management being one of the top 2 in its impact. So we would really advocate understanding the drivers to effective line managers, train them, as Annette's just highlighted, but also making sure that they're consistent across the organisation so that you can ensure that you have a consistent approach in relation to not just addressing line management issues, but ensuring that they are inspiring the colleagues who work for them. There's nothing worse than a poor line manager to disengage individuals, and conversely, a great line manager takes the whole organisation, the whole part of their business with them, and we certainly have been tracking it for a number of years and can certainly concur with Annette's summary there.
Great, thank you. Next question for Greg. I think this is about the Facebook workplace platform. How do you make sure that employees are participating and that it's not just HR-generated content?
Well, the first one is to say that it was launched not by HR. So one of the deliberate things that we did in the organisation was the Group Chief Executive launched the tool of Facebook at Work, and we didn't mandate it at all. We highlighted in our intranet, we highlighted in the communications great examples of how it's been used in our businesses, and it was fabulous in terms of the take-up over the first 5 or 6 months. We're now 2 years into using Facebook at Work. We have almost a 97% take-up rate across our organisation. Some of our business areas don't use it. There's a couple of areas who, through regulation requirements, are not allowed to use social media at their desktop, and in that respect we totally respect that, and they don't use it. But for all of those other organisations, we use it. But we've integrated Facebook at Work into our operating rhythm and our engagement strategy. So when we launch our total reward system, our employee engagement approach, that's done through our electronic media in the branches, it's done through Facebook at Work, it's done through the intranet. So we integrate Facebook at Work as part of our everyday life. So it's very hard if you work in RBS not to see Facebook at Work as just another tool that you use. I find that if you use it as a special case, people forget about it and don't use it. So we've worked really hard at putting it at the heart of the way we work in RBS, and so far so good. But we're only 2 years in, so ask me in another couple of years' time.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for a couple more. So next question is for Annette. We have a couple of questions here on cultures and differences by geography. Can you comment on whether you see differences by geography, and how do you incorporate different cultures? There's one question specific to M&A, but I think across all of your engagement activities.
Great question. Yes, there are differences between cultures, countries, nationalities. Certainly there are. I think what is important is when it comes to teleperformance that when we develop programs on a global basis, we are flexible enough for local adaptation. We are not rigid. So there needs to be some kind of local adaptation, and we allow that. Having said that, don't forget that we are driven by our teleperformance culture, which is our mission statement, our DNA, our values, and that is what counts the most. But yes, certainly there are differences, and we do have multilingual or multicultural sites, centers, where we manage maybe 25 different cultures in one site. And this is back to the previous question about the supervisor, because when you have 25 cultures in one operation, you need to have strong leadership and having a common higher purpose, so that you break down the barriers and you allow diversity and you include everyone, but you have one common purpose, one higher purpose, and one common culture. And this all goes back to the first line manager and of course also the top level management. I hope that answers the question.
I think this last question on cultures in terms of M&A, it's not just about geography or the country or the region, but it's also integrating different corporate cultures, and I think your answer touches on that as well. So thank you. Okay, last question. I think I'll ask both of you because I know we've talked about this in our interviews and some of our work for the report, but the difference between correlation and causation. So can we talk a little bit about, we can't say that customer satisfaction is higher because of employee engagement or vice versa. How do you integrate those? How do you talk about employee engagement and the impact it has, without saying it's caused by engagement? Greg, can we start with you?
Yes, of course. I guess firstly, just to give some context, between 1995 and the year 2000, there was a direct correlation between the increasing divorce rate in the United Kingdom and the importation of bananas to the United Kingdom. But it doesn't mean that one causes the other. So be careful and be wary of anyone coming up with causation as an answer. Much of the work that we do is statistically based, as you would imagine, as a bank. So we do a number of Cronbach alpha, CFI, NFI tests and model fit and misfit, but we absolutely would not look to causation work in relation to it. What we would go as far as to say with the work I've recently done with Harvard Business School is that in terms of organizational performance, sustained organizational performance, three things need to be in equity in it. Great people management, great customer service, and excellent operational management as well. So when one of those falls down, the other two are not going to be able to pull the weight. So for me, the issue in terms of correlation is certainly that we would go as far as to say in RBS that we have got strong correlation between great leaders' engagement and culture and superior outperformance in business performance metrics. But in terms of causation, we absolutely would not go that far. But what we would say is, in order to leverage the value of great people management, you do need to also have customer service at its height and also the operational management and the support behind you. So I would see that as three areas that you need to juggle with at the same time, which makes this a tough gig, right? It's always very challenging.
Perfect, thanks. Annette, in 20 seconds, we're almost over time. Do you have anything to add?
Well, I agree with you, Greg, what you are saying, and I think what the most important thing really is when it comes down to employee engagement is that it's not enough to do things or to do many things. It is important to measure, to correlate, but most of all, it is really coming down to doing things with your heart. So truly caring about people and truly caring about people being engaged. And it starts with you giving to your people and they will give back to you. And then you can correlate or not. But we know that if leaders, they give, employees will give back, and that is good for the business.
Well, thank you both for your time today, and thank you to the audience for the questions and for participating with us today. Join us next month for our next Human Capital Watch on HR mergers and acquisitions with Amy Abel, my colleague at the conference board. You'll also see in the deck we have some additional resources, some of our previous engagement research reports, an upcoming workplace culture conference, and you'll see a code for a discount if you'd like to attend that conference in December. And finally, please do fill out the evaluation. You'll see it pop up in your screen in just a minute. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.